I'm sitting there in the car reading this text. I have a breast pump and a diaper bag on my passenger seat. I have gifts for a newborn to return in the backseat of the car. I have a client contract on my lap because at this point I was a consultant. I just had started my own business. I had left the traditional workforce because I already had opted out because it was too overwhelming for me. I have a client contract on my lap. I have a pen in between my legs as I'm driving that's sort of stabbing me in the vagina every time I brake.
Welcome back to Working Wife, Happy Life. I am your host, Bethany Baines. It has been an incredible week. Many of you know that I was honored to speak at the New York City Women's March on Saturday, which was such an incredible experience and such amazing energy and commitment and community, and did not activate the typical crowd anxiety that I get, I think mostly because of the mission and the sentiment of it. So just still riding that high, which is so fantastic. And it was freezing for those of us that were there in New York. Our toes were numb, the snow was falling, but that did not stop us. So today's guest, we have the very funny, very compassionate, and very matter-of-fact Eve Rodsky. She is here to discuss her runaway success New York Times bestselling book, Fair Play, which also happens to be a Reese Witherspoon book club pick. But for those of you that aren't familiar with this work, it's really a labor of love aimed to systematize and gamify the labor that goes into running a household. And it's a book, and there's cards that go along with it, so you'll hear more context about that from her. But honestly, the minute you start reading this book, you breathe a sigh of relief and just feel like, yes, that's me. So I met Eve toward the middle of her journey, even though I think she's just begun, and the beginning of mine with the breadwinning women's community at Google. And she's just one of those people where you meet and you instantly get one another. I just feel very connected to her. We both talk like truck drivers, so there's lots of F-bombs in your near future. And it runs a little bit long, but there wasn't anything we thought that we could trim out. It's really, everything is just such a gem. So this is also, excitingly, our first episode in our new home, Newsstand Studios at Rockefeller Center. The team there has just been tremendous partners with us since the beginning, and we thank them so much for their continued support and super cool, super unique space of a 1940s newsstand that's been retrofitted. So as such, there is some ambient noise. There's a couple walkie-talkies in the background. At some point, this little punk kid opened the door to the studio and then slammed it shut. But, what are you going to do? It's New York City. So without further delay, here is my conversation with Eve. I'm so psyched to have you here. First of all, we are doing our first episode ever in the newsstand. And it is such a unique space. It's a totally retrofitted 1940s newsstand in Rockefeller Center, which is amazing. And I can't think of a better guest to have here as you're thinking about reinventing and retrofitting like the household roles and how we think about a lot of assumptions we've made for our roles as adults. So I have Eve Rodsky here with me, who has written this incredible book that has been so well received. And I knew from the moment I read that first article about you that this was really going to hit a chord, as it did with me, with so many other people, men and women. So first off, just thank you for being here, and huge, huge, huge congratulations.
Well, thank you. You're what I call a spiritual friend, someone who supports you and sort of wakes you up on your journey. And it doesn't have to be someone you know that long, but you were an early supporter. And I remember getting an email from you, Bethany, just on like info at Eve Rodsky, from a Fast Company article almost a year ago.
Yeah.
And it felt so validating to have someone reach out to see that they had read the Fast Company article, that the book hadn't come out. Because there's a lot of fear when you're a first-time author before releasing any of your work, especially a private work where you're going to be telling your own story and you've done a lot of research. So getting that early validation was really key from a couple people, and I think of you always in that group.
Yeah. Yeah,
So thank you.
I remember cold emailing you. Somebody had sent me the article, and I was like, I need to know this person.
It was
and
so cool.
It was so stalkerish, but
And then we had we had a conversation on the phone, and I just felt like we sort of instantly hit it off. And it's fun to find people. The most beautiful part, I think, of getting the courage to write a book and to spend all that time doing it is actually the journey. I mean, the process of the book, and of course, the creative output is amazing. But the journey and the people you meet, it's hard to even put in words how priceless it is.
Yeah.
In terms of affecting your own personal life and also sort of your growth and your path forward is just this. It's been this amazing journey.
I can't even. And I love that you use the word courage because there's a part of me, and I'm curious if you felt this on your journey. Any projects that I'm doing where you have that moment like, why am I the person to do it?
Correct.
And some of it is in this way of like, why can't I just be the person that goes to work and comes home and eats my dinner and watches my TV and goes to sleep? Like, what is that like? That's amazing. But then you get those moments of doubt, like, is my message really that important? Is my story really that interesting? Like, was that part? It's all part of building up to that.
There's so much doubt, and I think I talk about that actually in Fair Play, about this idea of our right to be interesting in midlife as women. And I think the problem with already needing the courage and all those questions, if you were just say like a white male author, but if you have these other things that are maybe not going for you, in my case, my gender and my stage of life, right, where I've had my kids and sort of I'm supposed to be done with my milestones. Like, I'm done with you, middle-aged, 43-year-old woman. Like, we don't want to hear from you anymore. Like, why are you rearing your ugly head to try to tell us your story? And I think, so I'm coming from like a real place of disadvantage in my mind, thinking, well, there's not really permission in society for me to be interesting already, because I'm really supposed to be just hashtag Taylor's mom or whatever.
Right. You actually lose your
your
actual
physical identity, right?
Like,
so,
you're no longer Eve, you're Taylor's mom.
Right, exactly. So my real son's name, hashtag Ben's mom. So if I'm hashtag Ben's mom, I don't even have like a name to put on a book.
Right.
So I felt like I was coming from that type of disadvantage. And so to reclaim your identity first, and then not on top of that to say, I'm going to reclaim my identity and to be a less gray version of myself, and then try to take it to the next level of saying, I'm going to put that down on paper.
Yeah.
And
for
then
the world to see.
For the world to see.
Yeah.
And then bring other people's stories into it as well, and make sure you have a responsibility to tell those stories accurately and with compassion. And to do those interviews with accuracy and compassion, because I'm talking about people's relationships and their roles in their home. That was interesting.
I was going to say, because I struggle with this too, where you are hearing, when you hear stories, you're hearing one side of those. But your book is very much about the partnership. And, when you're relaying the stories that you've heard as a writing exercise, making sure that you're getting the right amount of each person's perspective without kind of warping the truth of what happened, right? Because there's two sides of every story.
Correct.
Did you do a lot of the interviews together or separately? Like, how did you piece that together?
That's a good question. So Fair Play is really right about this idea that it's time to bring 21st century solutions to this age-old problem of women doing 2/3 or more of what it takes to run a home and family. Even when we work outside the home. That statistic has been very flat, and it's actually, there's a lot of cost to our economic participation. But I think in terms of storytelling, it's really is told from the perspective of women. And I think that was done I know that was done very intentionally, because I did it intentionally. Because back to putting women at the center of the story, I thought was really important. And I did think it was really important to hear women's voices, but I didn't want to ignore men. And what I saw was happening as I was reading sort of, book after book on the gender division of labor, what I did realize was that a lot of the statistics, a lot of the studies, a lot of the perspectives were just one gender. It was, women. Right. And I thought it was really important to hear men's side of the story. So a lot of it was really gathering men and doing interviews alone. I actually very rarely interviewed people together.
That's smart. I mean, but then as the creator, the onus is on you to represent that fairly. Maybe it's easier because you're a third party. You don't have the emotional hang-ups that each part of the
the relationship would have. But, after 16 years of marriage, I feel like we count things and we're like, that didn't happen that way.
Well, it is for sure. It's different perspectives. But I think what I was really searching for was patterns. And so that was the beauty. I started with my first moleskin. And so what I'll tell anybody of your listeners out there, right, is just if you don't feel, if we get that feeling that we were talking about before of like, why should it be you? Or is my story important? You just start.
Yeah.
I think there's something really powerful with just starting whatever journey you need to start or whatever thing you want to start. So I always do it with moleskins. I love going to the moleskin store or to Barnes & Nobles and picking out my new color for what I want to do. And it's male interviews I want to go into, or I wanted to mirror the U.S. Census. So I was very intentional about how I found different groups to interview, whether it was through friends of friends or through Facebook or through Instagram or through direct message or through some nonprofit organizations that I work with in my day job. So I had a moleskin for all of those.
So you had literally a separate moleskin for each initiative you were going
each cohort. I had a separate moleskin for each cohort, and then and per year they just sort of got bigger and bigger. But what was beautiful about having it written down for me, and my mother she's a PhD in sociology. She's a professor of social work. I'm trained in economics and anthropology and law. But the beauty of anthropology and of sociology, right, is it's not an economics, so I always had to push myself because I'm like, oh, this doesn't have to be quantitative.
Yeah.
But I was looking for these qualitative patterns. So when I'd see, I'll give you an example on guilt and shame.
Yep.
So one of my favorite things to do is ask open-ended questions. So I went out and I asked men an open-ended question. And I intentionally asked men who were more in the professional classes this question because they would be more likely to travel for work.
Yep.
So I asked them, if you get fogged in an SFO and you told your wife and kids you'd be home for dinner, you put your kids to bed that night, you've been traveling for a while, do you feel guilt and shame? And so I love asking very open-ended questions. So I'd, write that down. And what I was expecting from, the first time I asked a man that question, I expected maybe the answer to like hem and haw or no. What I didn't expect is for the person I was asking, the man, to not understand the question.
To be like, what?
So I'll give you an example. Right,
mean?
Exactly. So it would be, it would be an interview like, do you feel guilt and shame? And then the man would say back to me, because my wife's going to be mad at me. And I'd say, no, do you feel guilt and shame? And I wouldn't, give him a hug. I just kept saying like the word. Well, because my daughter or son is sad that I'm not there. I'm like, no, do you feel guilt and shame? Do you feel guilt and shame?
Inside you.
So I wish I could take your listeners with me on that journey so that was a pattern of not understanding the question when I asked that guilt and shame question. And that was really powerful to me because it was eye-opening to watch half the population not have something that felt so intrinsic to how I felt as a human being since the day I was born. I felt like I was born with guilt and shame tattooed on my ass, right?
Yeah.
So it was interesting. And so things like that journey of being able to uncover patterns and write that down and be like, didn't understand the question. And then when sort of it got to a critical mass coming off the page, I said, wow, there's something here. There's a very big difference with how women and men, experience guilt and shame, see guilt and shame, whether it's maybe men have guilt in other places I didn't ask, but especially with home life.
Yeah.
I think guilt and shame is really reserved for women especially.
Yeah.
And yes, I mean, I'm talking cisgender heterosexual here because this is the gender division of labor.
Right.
So I am talking him and her.
Yep.
But it doesn't mean that fair play and the solution and my interviews did not include same-sex couples because it did. I have a very robust interview set of same-sex couples.
Yeah. And I think so what's amazing to me is there's the sociological aspect of it, of how boys and girls are raised. And like you're saying, you feel like you were born with guilt and shame. And you reminded me of a story when my son was probably about 4 or 5 and we lived in a 2-bedroom apartment and his bedroom was just right outside the living room. And one morning he said, Mommy, I could hear you and Daddy arguing last night. And I crouched down and I said, oh, baby, how did that make you feel? Arguing is a very natural part of a relationship. And do you want to talk about it? And he's like, no, I just wanted you to be quiet so I could go to sleep. And I was like, and here we have how boys interpret this. I'm like saving up for therapy for him. And so we have these things that are very intrinsic to who we are in terms of gender norms. But what your book touches on is kind of all the different parts that go into making a life work. And it's not just the household. It's everything that happens extracurricularly. It's everything that happens within the schools. It's everything that happens within your families and social engagements. And how do we divide that? And if you're going to have a partnership at any stage in your life, regardless of gender or non-binary, associations, you're going to have this conversation at some point to not approach a space of resentment.
Correct.
And to understand, I think one thing that I really took away is not only the resentment of what you're lifting or what one person is doing versus the other, but also you get to know each other so much better because you understand what the other person values and uncover why they value that. Can you share? You have a great story about the garbage.
Oh, yes.
I know you've shared, but it's so powerful.
I actually have not. I don't think I've actually shared that on a podcast before, so it'll be interesting. But I think
breaking news.
Yes, it was the core. It's the core of the fair play system, and I'll explain what I mean. What I mean is that I'm asking couples to re-examine how we treat the home, to treat our home as our most important organization. I like to say even my Aunt Marion's Mahjong group has more clearly defined expectations than the home. You don't bring snack twice, you're kicked out. I'd rather be part of our Mahjong group than in any relationship in this country where we're all just trying to figure things out on the fly. And it's very stressful to do that. Who's doing this? Why didn't you do that? Wait, who's taking the? It's why I think there's a new study that came out that most people they're most miserable at 47.8 years old.
Oh shit.
So I'm not going to let people get there because it doesn't have to be that way. And I think part of it is you systematize the home, and that sounds very overwhelming and very corporate speak. So what do I mean by that? All I mean is to have new conversations about garbage where you're asking different questions. So instead of saying, I need you to take out the garbage, or why the fuck didn't you take out the garbage,
Right.
which is more like it. That's me,
that's
my
how it really
nails
is,
on
yes.
the chalkboard, as Seth calls me, or used to call me pre-fair play, my husband. What happens is you are doing two steps. So step one is you're owning your shit like you do at work. There's only two things that you need for fair play to work. You own your shit. So when you say you're going to do something, you own it. You do holiday cards. You don't just select the picture and just say, hey, honey, can you come see what the formatting is here and can you send it out or stamp it? No.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as we're redefining teamwork here. We are redefining teamwork. I'll say that 3 times. We're redefining teamwork. It doesn't mean we're stepping on each other's toes. It means we're working within a greater organization and we're owning our shit within the organization, just like the most successful companies do that. Context, not control, for the full ownership. So you do that. You're owning your shit. So Seth understood that because I was playing with organizational management as I was developing the fair play system.
And that's what you do professionally,
I do
right?
this professionally.
Okay.
I work, my specialty is organizational management and project management and values-based mediation for highly complex family foundations and family businesses.
So you're one of those people that I open up your junk drawer and it's like super organized?
Correct.
Oh my gosh.
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Go on.
I have a process drawer. So it's all systems,
You
right?
have a process drawer?
Yeah, because you process things. It's too overwhelming to just put things away. So you have to be able to have a place to park
It's like
it first.
a purgatory
Yeah,
drawer?
you purgatory. Yeah, and then you purgatory it, and then you process it. But that way it goes away. We can talk all
every
about
drawer in my house.
Yes, exactly. But and I try to live by the minimalist behaviors of and I'll tell you why, right? And this is what gets down to garbage. Why do I live like that? And why do I fucking hate garbage? So we'll talk about that. So Seth understood this idea as I was playing around with this idea that when you hold a fair play card, the fair play system is based on this figurative 100-card game. And the cards represent every single thing you need to run a home and family. So one of the cards is garbage.
Yep.
That has to be done. It's a domestic chore. I call it a daily grind.
It sure is.
And so, again, when we were playing with the system, when I was becoming my own client and bringing this mediation, this conception, planning, execution, owning your shit to the home, Seth understood that. He said, okay, I got it. If you want me to own garbage, I know I have to put the bag back in. I know I have to get it out before trash day. I got it.
I never
So-
put the bag back
right.
in.
That is.
We
I
could
mean,
never be
really.
married.
I mean, no, because then you're.
But can we be friends still?
We can be friends, yes, but just the respect of the full ownership.
It's true.
Or else,
It's
and just
true.
redeal the car to me.
Okay.
I would have you do other things. I'd have you do maybe school forms or something like that.
I'm good at forms.
Yeah. So I'll take garbage back. So that's how it works. You just redeal on your skill sets, and doesn't
Okay.
have to. It's not a life sentence. So for Seth, I said take garbage for a while. You'll own it. So he understood that part. So this is about 3 years ago, as I was developing the Fair Play system. So what happened was, I ended up still stalking him over garbage. I was his garbage shadow, especially on the weekends. So he would be in the kitchen and I'd see that garbage can sort of overflowing or getting harder to sort of push in because it's sort of in a
Yeah.
drawer, like one of those sliding door things.
Yeah.
And I'd sort
like
of
a
like
banana peel
panic.
hanging
Yeah.
out.
I was sort of like, my heart would start pounding and racing. And I would just start staring at him. And then sometimes I would even open the door underneath the sink. You know how those doors open up, right? Because Seth is really tall. And so I figured, well, maybe if he falls over the open door, he'll just get the garbage liner
so
out and take it out,
passive-aggressive.
right? So passive aggressive. And this is I'm a Harvard trained mediator. I'm literally trained to use my voice and I'm trained to teach families to use their voice. So I'm thinking
But your own home is
Correct,
totally different.
Correct. And also, I will say that communicating about the home, what I found in my 500 plus interviews that I was telling you about before, that mirrored the U.S. Census, including using my own life as an interview, it's very hard to communicate about the home without some tools, and that's what Fair Play really is. It's a toolkit to rediscover the home and make it way more efficient, so you get time back for you. But it requires a new language. So this is sort of as we're playing this out, and I'm understanding that I want to do things differently in the home. So I start stalking Seth about garbage. I'm very passive aggressive. And he looks at me and he just slams the door under the sink one day and he's like, I'm done. I know what you're doing. I'm not doing this garbage thing. It's just, I don't know what's going on. So I realized that organizational management only gets you so far. So what I decided to do was become my own client for real. And what I've done for a decade is build complex family systems based on shared values. And so what I mean by that is I ask my clients when they're dealing with a very complex family foundation decision or a family business decision, especially around succession, which people never understood. But thank God for that HBO show Succession, because now everybody
haven't watched it.
I haven't either, except for a couple episodes. But I will say that I'm really happy that it exists because now it's very easy to explain what I do.
Right. They understand it. Yeah.
That's sort of the families I work for. I think they have advisors that are sort of my role in the show. So that's what we're doing with families that are, feuding so badly when I meet them. Dad is storming out of the room every time son speaks in a meeting, to the point where I'm getting families to talk with grace and humor and generosity over 3 generations around a table about very complex issues. But we do it because we're building systems based on our values, based on our shared why. What is your why?
Right.
And there's not always a shared why. It's my why and your why, and how do we come up with a sort of middle ground for where we're going to get. And I'll explain. So Seth is upset with me about garbage because he was going to own it, but then I couldn't let it go. And I think a lot of women, we struggle with that, right? This idea, well, how am I going to give up control? How am I going to get trust back? That
I want you
what
to
I
do
give
it,
over,
but do it my way.
Exactly. Do it my way, or is it really going to get done? There's all that stuff that's sort of preventing us from having different types of conversations about the home. And so a lot of women will say to me, almost every woman in my 500 plus interviews with men and women, the women were saying to me, instead of talking about the domestic home, I'd rather just do it myself, because in the time it takes me to tell them what to do, I might as well do it myself. Well, that's a terrible argument. We can talk about that later. So Seth, garbage, ready to take on this task. I feel like I'm undermining things. And so I take a step back and I say, I'm missing what I've been doing for a decade. I've missed bringing this idea of what is your why into the home. So I sat down with Seth one day and I said to him, okay, I'm sorry that I've been stalking you over garbage. I know that caused a little bit of an
I tried
incident.
to kill you with the
kill
drawer.
you with the door opening, and you fell over it, and it was like a whole thing. And so I'm sorry that happened. But what you don't know about me, even though we've been together for, let's see, at that point, 13 years, what you don't know about me is that, yes, you knew I grew up in a messy household. Yes, you knew, my mom is sort of, never gave us luggage. We just had trash bags that we carried along because she didn't believe in possessions that way. But what you don't know, Seth, is she also didn't believe in a garbage can. And so in our very single mom, latchkey, Lower East Side, Avenue C and 14th Street home in the 80s and 90s, we would just have a plastic bag that sat on a knob in the kitchen. Mm-hmm. And trash would spill out every single night. And what happens in New York City in the 1980s when trash spills out is you get cockroaches and water bugs, lots of them. And meal bugs in your Rice Krispies where...
I'd almost take a cockroach over a water bug. I cannot stand water bugs.
They came out of the sink, and they were all over the floor. And even when my mom tried to convince me one time that she had put Rice Krispies in the box, but it was really Cocoa Crisp. I mean, she had put Cocoa Krispies in the box, but it was really Rice Krispies with those meal bugs. So she was just not to feed me.
Oh, okay.
But just to throw it out so I wasn't freaked out.
Like, should we call somebody?
Yes, I was like, I know what that is, Mom. Those are freaking bugs. So what I said to Seth is my why I care about garbage so much is because I feel like I'm 7 years old again. Why is my heart pounding when I see just one, like you said, banana peel coming out of the garbage? Because I feel like I'm 7 years old again. I have no control over my life.
Yeah.
I'm in a home where I don't know when you're coming home, Mom. I don't know who's feeding me. I don't know how there's going to be less chaos in my life. And that's what's happening to me when I see garbage.
It's a trigger. Yeah.
It was a real trigger. And I think being able to be vulnerable with Seth and be able to say to him why this matters to me so much was very, it was cathartic for me. And I think I even cried a little bit. I was feeling very overwhelmed and emotional about it. And then he was able to chime in and say, I totally get where you're coming from. But I come from a totally different perspective. I'm not triggered by garbage.
Yeah.
I actually didn't have to even invest in a pillow because I slept on Domino's pizza boxes in my fraternity. Like garbage, saved me from having to buy a pillow. Like I like garbage. Like garbage doesn't bother me the same way it bothers you.
Right.
So what happens when you are at such different places about something that has to get done every day?
Right.
Well, that can lead to one way. It can lead to that being multiplied by 100 cards, where you're going to end up what I call your resentometer, number 10, where you're like ding, ding, dinging, and then 25% of divorces are ending over the unfairness of domestic labor, right? Do we want to go there?
It doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. Or do you want to go to a place where you can resolve that?
Yeah.
But it takes work. It takes work to resolve it. And the work it takes is for you to understand you're coming from different places. And I talk about this in Fair Play. We use a concept of the minimum standard of care in our tort system, our legal system. Judges use it every day. In our medical system, we're looking at minimum standards of care and care thresholds. This is a concept that works. And so when you can come up with a minimum standard of care, it takes a little bit of time to have these new conversations over garbage. But what it does is it alleviates you from having them in the future.
Right.
So any behavioral economist will say, invest now, have those conversations now. If it gets you out of having to take out garbage every single day for the rest of your life.
Right.
And so our minimum standard of care, Seth said to me, what's reasonable to me is to take garbage out once a day. And I'll put it in my work calendar like it's an appointment when I get home. As long as you never fucking mention the word garbage ever again.
So Seth should not listen to this podcast.
Yes, well, right. He can listen to it from a retrospective perspective, but I'm not nagging you over garbage anymore, Seth. And I will say thank you. Thank you, Seth, for starting to take out the garbage because it was like a miracle.
Yeah.
It was like a miracle. There were no more reminders.
Yep.
Things started happening. Garbage just started going out. It was such a mental relief for me. And that's just one card, right? Change started from one card. We modeled how to have a conversation over one card.
Right.
The beauty of that was then we went to, say, extracurricular sports, and we started to have conversations of what that means to own it.
Right.
And then we would go to the next school forums, and we'd have conversations about what that means to own it and to have a minimum standard of care. And then slowly we get into a rhythm now where 3 years later of playing this Fair Play system, we have a weekly check-in that's about 20 minutes to just say what's coming up that week. But we know each other's minimum standards so well. We know what we have to get done. Doesn't mean we're not having, things, go awry.
Right.
But it just means that we're not making those fucking micro decisions where you're getting decision fatigue every day.
Right.
Because we've had the hard discussions first.
Like, you know what your normal is.
Exactly.
So obviously with all of your success, you've been traveling a lot, and I'm sure he's taking on more, and people
Yes.
are pitching in. And so it's like, okay, but you know where your steady balance is. So when it goes off the rails, you're very appreciative of each other because you've seen what it looks like to take that on.
Yes.
And these are things I would imagine that when you said that stat, 25% of marriages, it doesn't surprise me, but it's alarming, right? Like this
And it actually could be more, I think. It
Yeah.
could be more because
well,
that
'cause
doesn't...
it's self-reported too.
It's
I'm sure.
self-reported, and it also doesn't take into account affairs. And I
Yeah.
will say that people were very candid with me, I will say, about their home life when I was able to speak to them alone.
Yeah.
And I haven't fully dived into Three Women yet, but supposedly someone
Oh, I
told me that
love
there's
that
a
book.
story
So good.
very similar to some things that I found in my book, which I call Unicorn Space Gone Wild, right? This idea of what happens to you when sort of you lose your identity in a marriage, and you are tasked with, being a woman in sort of midlife and all the domestic work, and we sort of become invisible along with our invisible work. But I was just talking to somebody recently about that book, and that there's a theme around that, because there's themes that I see a lot around sort of women and men seeking out ex-boyfriends on Facebook or LinkedIn, or feeling nostalgic for something past because
They identified themselves at that
yeah,
time.
exactly.
Yeah.
And now it's sort of just this resentment, especially around unfairness in the home, and it sucks. We don't want to get there in midlife, and I really, really, really hope that people listen here today so that they know that you don't have to live that way. You don't have to live in a place of sort of resentment and anger and frustration. There's really a new path where men really are invited into their full power in the home.
Yeah.
And that's what I keep seeing over and over again with people who are reading the book and playing this card game, the Fair Play card game, is that men are coming to the table in such beautiful ways that I did not expect.
So I was going to mention that too, because I'd imagine this starts off as a problem that women have, right? The men don't see it, they don't understand, and that actually
Correct. It
breeds
is
even
gendered.
more anger, right? How can you not see this? We actually had, I was doing a talk at Google, and your name came up because a woman stood up and said that she had like a 1-year-old, and there's certain things that she does better than her husband. And she said, for example, I'm just better at making doctor's appointments. And I was like, can you stop right there?
Right.
Like, I could see you being better at like wrapping presents or baking a souffle, but like a doctor's appointment is a very binary outcome.
Yes, exactly.
There's
You're
no
right.
way you're better at that.
Yeah, right.
And
Same thing as taking out the trash.
yes.
Binary outcome. Either goes out or in. That's
And
it.
Farnoosh. Like Farnoosh and I just looked at each other, and she's like, you've had Eve here, right? And I'm like, yes, I have a book for you, because it's that assumption that because we do it on a certain timeline, or because we do it, I don't know, maybe with a certain expediency, or we fill out the forms perfectly, that we're doing it right. And like sometimes it just needs to be done.
Correct.
And I find that, when you were saying before, how do we get to women earlier in this? Because I look at the breadwinning women's community that I've built, where if I had a community like this when I was starting in this journey 10 years ago, I would have been able to say, oh, okay, here's some tools, or it's going to be okay, and this is how it can work out. And, when I hear you saying that you're going to get into this place of resentment, in my head, I'm thinking it's not if, it's when.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to
Yes,
remove.
I just got chills. I got chills when you just said that, because I feel why you're such a spiritual friend is because I think it's so wonderful to meet you on this journey, to say that I really do feel like we're doing this for the women 10 years younger than us, right?
Yeah.
I'm 43. When I see
Same.
someone who's 33 and about to get into their life, family planning stages, or women in their 20s, I just want them to have this crystal ball and these systems and habits set up so early.
Yeah.
And I will be that person, that annoying person that when you see me coming, you're like, oh, there's Eve again talking about the gender division of labor. But it is such a core thing to be able to want to bring up the people behind us.
Yeah.
And I think, and to do it better than we did it. And I don't want people to have to feel like a gray version of themselves like I did, or to be, the book starts, Fair Play starts with this day that's burned on my brain, right? Of a text, sobbing on the side of the road from a text that Seth sent me. And the text just said, "I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries." And Bethany, you picture that scene. I'm sitting there in the car reading this text. I have a breast pump and a diaper bag on my passenger seat. I have gifts for a newborn to return in the backseat of the car. I have a client contract on my lap because at this point I was a consultant. I just had started my own business. I had left the traditional workforce because I already had opted out because it was too overwhelming for me. I have a client contract on my lap. I have a pen in between my legs as I'm driving that's sort of stabbing me in the vagina every time I brake. And I
Can
keep
you talk about what the pen's for? Oh, for the contract.
For the contract. And so I'm
I thought
marking
this
up.
was
I'm like,
going a whole
Jesus,
other way.
no. And this stabs me back in the vagina. I'm like, fuck. Right? Because I'm keep thinking if I put in the cup holder, the thing that rolls out. So I had this pen in between my legs. I'm zooming to pick up Zach, who was 3 at the time, my older son, at his toddler transition program, which in America, because we value working families, lasts like 7 minutes.
Yes, thank you for that.
Thank you, schools. And so I'm zooming, and then I say, you know what? Okay, I'm going to be late to pick up Zach. I really did think I was going to get into a car accident. The texting and driving wasn't enough, and the marking up the contract. I figured the sobbing with those, the trio, the trifecta of the sobbing.
Were you drinking
and
too?
the stabbing me in the vagina and the texting while driving was going to get me. So I pull over and I just start crying.
Yeah.
I start crying thinking, Jesus, back to the single mom thing. I had grown up in a single mom household, and I vowed this wasn't going to happen to me. I vowed I was going to marry an equal partner. And more importantly, how did this happen? How did I become the default, or as I call in Fair Play, the she-fault for every single household and domestic task? Apparently, even being the fulfiller of my husband's smoothie needs. Yeah, his smoothie needs that morning.
Yeah.
He was pissed. He didn't have a smoothie. So it was a very eye-opening moment. Thank God he sent me that text, because it sent me down this journey of trying to understand
It's a catalyst.
What the fuck was happening.
Right.
But back to what you were saying about women, the when. So that was, I think what we're both doing here is saying it doesn't have to be a when.
Right.
It can be an if, and hopefully it never will even have to be an if.
Right.
If we tackle these things.
Yep.
But first, women, we have to do some work on ourselves. And I got into an argument with a friend who's identifies as a left-wing feminist, which I thought I was, by the way, but I guess I'm more like a Nora Ephron feminist. And she said, well, why are you putting the onus on women to have these conversations? Men should be having these conversations. So I said, okay. I said,
They're not
then,
going to.
then you do that. You do that.
Yeah.
But what I like to say is I quote Nora Ephron back to her, and I said, you can be the victim of your own life, or you can be your heroine. Mm-hmm. So there is beauty in taking agency in your own life.
Oh, 100%.
There is beauty in taking agency in your own life. It doesn't mean I'm asking women to solve the problem. Fair play is all about a joint solution privilege of having two people solve it together. But yes, the onus is on us to say we want change and we're not going to live this way.
And we want support. And also, like, we always talk about how I'm the best at giving advice to other people. I'm terrible at taking my own advice. I am my own worst advocate.
Oh my God, lawyers are the worst. Lawyers are the worst that way.
Negotiate salary packages for anyone way better than myself. It's just, that's how we are. And it's the same in our homes. And I think a lot of us, when I think back to myself 10 years ago, and I think back when I, first started being a breadwinning woman, I had a young child. My husband was working at the time, so we were a dual income household. He worked from home full time. I was running out to work. I had my son at daycare right next to my office because I wanted to be able to get to him if anything should happen. But that meant that I was driving through the Holland Tunnel every morning and every evening with my screaming toddler in the back throwing popcorn at me. And
it's a really great way to start your workday.
Right? And you're just like, and then you'd get into work and you have like graham crackers in your hair.
That cortisol, you're just like shaking it off. It's like, I feel like there's an animal that shakes things. You're going to have to shake all that off. Yes.
And I just felt like I had, no time, no outlet. And then my husband would say something like, you should get a hobby. And it would infuriate me. But from him, it was coming from love. Like if I had said, I want to go, I did end up taking up yoga, but if I wanted to go do anything at that point, that was his giving me permission to go. And I was hearing it as, you're boring.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? You're just taking this stuff too seriously. So unless women are comfortable saying, I don't feel supported, I'm taking on too much,
Right.
or, also, I'm sorry, but that time in your life when your kids are that little and you're working full time and you're juggling all this other stuff, it's just fucking hard. It's gonna get better, but there are those moments in life where like it feels you are stretched so thin. And so
Thank you for the reminder to take self-care. It's just another thing, a lot on my fucking things to do list, right? That's one of my favorite memes. But I think without the context of domestic rebalance, right, without systematizing
You're like, where?
the entire organization of your home, I fucking hated that shit.
Yeah.
I hated find your passion and purpose. I hated this, wellness stuff or like Instagram pictures of moms who are like, I'll take you, here's how you do a headstand. I'm like, I'm not fucking doing a headstand.
It felt dismissive.
There's a pen stabbing me in the vagina. I'm doing nothing.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's so important. In the Fair Play system, there is the happiness trio cards because 500 plus people, when I asked them what they would do with an extra hour of their day, identified 3 things. They identified adult friendships. They identified like having a beer with a friend. They identified self-care, not like commodified wellness bullshit like CBD oil pedicures, but real. Okay, I mean, I'm okay. I'm okay. Yeah. But real, nothing that you have to consume. I'll just say that. Real self-care.
Right.
Like walk on the beach with my dog, or the hobby, like you said. I don't call it a hobby. I'm retiring that word, but I call it in my book unicorn space, which is the scientific term is something called eudaimonic well-being, the permission to be you, and sharing that with the world in some creative outlet. That could be the volunteer firefighter, that could be the artist, that could be the yoga teacher. But those 3 things, unicorn space, self-care, and adult friendships are very important.
Huge.
But without the context of domestic rebalance, there was no fucking way I was doing any of those.
Right. Because
I had no way to
it's one more
articulate
thing
them.
on your plate. Yeah.
Or it was another thing on my plate, or I felt like, oh, do I have to now be perfect and interesting,
Right.
and happy and be a great host and perfect body, and so it felt so overwhelming. So I think again, without the context of a domestic rebalance, where you can really regain and guard your time like diamonds, it wasn't going to happen. And that's what I want to just say to your listeners, that this was the main finding of Fair Play and why it couldn't be Cards Against Humanity. I had this dream was I was playing the card game with Seth and all these beta testers couple. I actually made cards before they became designed as beautifully as they are now. I had an old iteration for my beta testing couples. And I was like, oh, this would be cool sitting on a Target shelf next to Cards Against Humanity. But the reason why it had to be a book was because there was too much work that women have to do on themselves. We're not shaming women to say you're the cause of the problem, but society does work on us.
Right. You're giving permission to focus on
Let's focus on us and say we have to unpack some patriarchy layers. And I never use the word patriarchy in Fair Play. But really what it is, it is patriarchy.
Yeah.
And it's living in this capitalist system. There's a lot of, reasons. I don't go into so many of the reasons. I give you a very big bibliography if you want to go into some of the systemic reasons for why. But what has happened is that, and this was the main finding of my research, was that men, women in society view men's time as finite, like diamonds, and women's time is infinite, like sand. So if you just have that assumption that women's time is infinite and men's time is finite to be guarded, and that's what society is doing, then of course women are going to internalize those messages.
Of course. Yeah.
So there was not a woman out there who wasn't saying something to me that I call them toxic time messages, where in some way, back to your woman in the audience that you're talking about at that one about I'm better at making doctor's appointments, we guard men's time. And this is what I mean. Women all over the country were saying things to me like, of course I pick up the extra slack. I'm the one who picks up the call from the pediatrician, even if I'm at the office. I'm the one who makes school lunches because my husband makes more money than me. Well, we can't say that here, right?
Right.
But that was a big one.
But a lot of people will have that,
So women would say that to me, and I'd say, okay, that's a losing argument.
Right.
Because we know pay equity, even in the same job, you're going to be making less.
So
that's going to just keep you down a bad path forever. So let's like throw that out with the bathwater. That's gardening men's time. Okay, next, women would say to me, well, of course I make the doctor's appointment because I'm just a better multitasker. I'm wired differently. Again, guarding, another excuse why men don't have to do it. Do domestic tasks. Okay, well, I went to the top neuroscientist, Bethany, in the world. There's no evidence that women are better multitaskers, that we have better executive brain function than men.
Been told.
And this was my favorite off the record comment from this amazing older white male privileged neuroscientist that I love, that I was like, I need to be able to quote you. But he's like, I have too many chairs under my name. So he's like, I don't want to be caught cursing. But he's given me some other quotes. He said to me, imagine Eve, right? When I was asking him about, are women better multitaskers? Because a lot of women are telling me that they're wired differently to do all these domestic chores. He said, imagine Eve, we can convince half the population that they're better at wiping asses and doing dishes. How great for the other half of the population.
Exactly.
That was a mic drop for me. That actually changed my life. Even if I hadn't written the book, back to what we were saying about the journey, meeting him and hearing that quote literally changed my life. It changed my entire perspective. And I said, wow, that's very, very powerful. And you were completely correct. So that was another way regarding men's time, this multitasking argument.
Yeah.
Then, as I said to you before, women were saying to me all over, well, in the time it takes me to tell them what to do, I might as well do it myself. Went to the top behavioral economists in the world. They said that's obviously a very, very terrible argument for the long term.
Right.
Short term it works, but you just keep doing it.
In the second day you would see.
Very terrible argument for the long term, because then that means you're going to wipe asses and do dishes forever.
Yeah.
And then finally, even women and men in the same job. I actually tried to intentionally seek out men and women in the same job. So
as a couple?
As a couple. So for example, sometimes it was like there was two people, a man and a woman, who were married, who shared a production company.
Yeah.
But it was also like two shipping supervisors at UPS, for example. They'd met on the job. They had the same job, two shipping supervisors, or two colorectal surgeons. Met in medical school. And still the women were saying to me, my husband gets super overwhelmed, but I can find the time. And so I like to say, unless we're Albert Einstein and we can fuck with the space-time continuum, where are we finding that time?
Right.
Or is it really about how we choose to use our time?
Right.
And is it just that women have less choice over how they use their time? And so that's the unpacking we need to do first. To take out these toxic time messages from our lives. Anytime we say them, say, okay, we need to unpack why we've said that, understand that those are wrong assumptions. And to say that my time, Eve, my time is as valuable as Seth's time. Regardless if he makes more money than me. Regardless if I think I'm a better multitasker. Regardless if I think it's easier to not tell him what to do. No. My time is diamonds, Seth's time is diamonds. If we both just have 24 hours in a day, then there has to be a way to get a place where women have more choice over how they use their time.
Right. And
otherwise, we're literally going to die of fatigue.
Right. Well, I mean, and some days I feel like that too. I just feel like there's so much to do and so much to give in so many different places that then you get back to the shame and guilt. You get that feeling like I'm definitely letting somebody down somewhere.
Yes.
And I've actually gotten to the stage at my 43 years where I just don't give a shit.
Yes.
I'm like, I am letting somebody down and I just don't care anymore. But it's, you can't do that all the time in all the aspects of your life. You can do that a little bit spread around. But look, it's a really important message. I think we do get a lot of the societal push on what we should be doing and what seems like more gender biased work. For the breadwinners that are listening, there are studies that breadwinning women actually do more housework and logistical upkeep.
Yes. I just got chills because there are those studies. Yes.
And I think that, whether or not that's true for you, for those of you that it is true for, ask yourself, is that part of something deeper in terms of trying to make up for something that both of you may feel like you should be doing versus the way your life really is. And that's finding beauty in what life has actually created for you and having the conversations that may seem laborious up front. I'm sure that 20 minutes you spent talking about garbage was not as long as it would take to actually take the garbage, or was longer than it would take to take the garbage out. but you multiply that times 30 days in a month, and all of a sudden there you have your time back. So I
time
know
is
my
back.
math is a little iffy there.
No, that was good math. But I think, and what I love about you too, Bethany, is that you come out of a company, right? I mean, we're talking where you automatically got systems, right? And I had this one systems engineer actually say to me, not at Google, but someone who's also, sort of a systems engineer by training, saying to me, he's read Fair Play, and he had this really beautiful quote about, I won't get it exactly right, but he was like, well, I think it's very interesting that we've been ignoring the home. Because he said, if I was going to be building an algorithm, back to your math, I'm definitely not a coder, so I don't exactly know what I'm saying.
That's all right. I work for Google. I still don't know what you're saying.
Yeah, I want to go back to him and what he exactly meant. But he was saying basically that if you're working on math or something, you would never ignore a variable because that could lead to the wrong outcome, right? Or in math, right? If you're doing algebra, right? You're like, oh, X times whatever. Well, you have to fill in X at some point, right?
Right.
The variables are there for the equation for a reason. So what he was saying to me was, what if you actually had your home organization be synergistic with your work organization? What if, when I was saying to him that we should treat our home like our most important organization, then you would build a very different equation than if you're ignoring the home at all.
Right.
And so what happens in workplaces now, and he was saying this as a manager, is that we ignore the home as a variable. We just assume that someone else has it.
Yes.
And he was saying to me how wrong that is. He got this aha moment from Fair Play, and I need to get a little bit better. I'm not so articulate. It was the first time I've ever said that on the air.
It's huge.
But it gave me chills. It was such a beautiful way of saying it. He was saying, like, that wouldn't work. It wouldn't work in math. It doesn't work in systems to ignore a variable that affects every single person.
Right.
For me to ignore the fact that you have children, for me to give anybody on my team guilt and shame if they have to leave the office at 2 to take your child to the pediatrician, right? Or for us to have to raise our hand if we have to take a piss.
Right.
Like, no. It starts with creating a work culture
happens.
to say we are going to synergize. We're going to have a synergistic home organization and a work organization. And that looks very different than ignoring the home.
Right.
And that's what I'm hoping Fair Play can do. I'm going into corporations who say that. When we treat our home as our most important organization, part of what we can do in the workplace to alleviate us from all this patriarchal toxic time bullshit where we treat women's time like sand. There's three things that I think we can do. And there's more, but for the corporate workplace especially. And I was talking to about this with a amazing man who adopted Fair Play about a year ago, and he just got promoted to be the U.S. head of his multinational corporation. And I called him I texted him and we got talking to congratulate him, and I love him and his wife. And we started talking about Fair Play, and I said, well, what are you going to do for me now? That you're in such a position of power. And we got into this idea, right, of
good negotiating.
One was, pay equity. Because if you really believe a woman's hour is as valuable as a man's hour, then you pay them the same. Right? There's no clearer way to show that you value women's time as the same as men's time. So that he got that. Then we started talking about leave, paid leave, and the difference now, and from when he was a little bit younger to now even, and hopefully being more woke around this idea of how do you really encourage men to take paternity leave.
Yes, I think we should force them.
Yeah, well, that's
women don't have a choice.
Exactly. So I basically said a lot of it is about intent, not only really putting policies in place, but it's modeling. Mm-hmm. You have to. I'm forcing you, Ed. You're a little older, but when you had your kids, I'm forcing whoever's under you to take their paternity leave.
Right.
Make them take it.
Well,
right?
because think about so we have a very generous leave at Google, and what we've found is, obviously men are taking their leave. They're much more whatever, woke, if you want, coming back in terms of what it takes to not only take care of that little child for so long, but also then to come back into work and what that emotional pull is when you have to come back into the workforce. But also, I think we're going to start to see a lot more men saying, I'm okay with my career taking a backseat because this is where I should be. And that is, I think, really what we're seeing a ton of. And that is just so wonderful for society. And like you said, this generation that's coming up, being raised in these households where they have the involved parents and they don't see certain things as a gendered role, and I don't want to take gender totally out of it, because I think gender can be a really beautiful thing, but when it comes to the heavy lifting and it comes
but
to
I'm
the
sorry,
time,
because just because I have a vagina, I'm not better at making doctor's appointments.
right? Like, it's literally not possible.
Right. I'm going to say that again. Just because I have a vagina does not mean I'm better at making doctor's appointments.
Right.
There's gender, like you said, there's gender stuff elsewhere that could be beautiful, but not in that way.
Not in those
right?
things. Yes.
And then this is the thing about what you were saying before. If you're taking a back seat, if you're a man and you're doing that, and that's what you're doing during your paternity leave, right? You're saying, I'm willing to take the step back, even just on my leave, right? The way women do. The beauty is then it becomes normalized.
Right.
Because what happens when women, quote unquote, take this back seat, right? Even if it's not even a back seat, even if it's just taking their fucking maternity leave.
Right.
What we end up seeing in science and the statistics is that women lose statistically, women lose 5 to 10% of their wages for every child that comes out of their vagina or is cut out of their stomach, like it was for me.
Or adopted. I mean,
Correct.
it's anytime
or
you're
adopted
distracted
when you're
by
in
a child.
care. And actually, I don't know if it happens when you go off to take care of a parent. I will look into that.
That's
but
interesting.
I do know that the motherhood penalty is very, very strong. And actually, the pay gap between mothers and non-mothers is actually even bigger than men and women.
Oh, really?
Yes. And so the way we can, in midlife, help women down that path is by normalizing care, by valuing care. So I like to ask this open-ended question to men and women separately because they're willing to be more honest. And I ask, is an hour holding your child's hand in the pediatrician's office as valuable to society as an hour in the boardroom? And until we actually really believe with our true core that the answer is yes, that an hour holding your child's hand is as valuable to society as an hour in the boardroom, nothing's going to change.
Right.
Because then men won't do it.
Right.
So when we value that time, when we value care, everything changes. And so that is the beauty of taking agency in your own home. That's what fair play is about. It's about taking agency in your own home so that you and your partner both value care. So I'll tell you one quick story.
I want to hear it.
Yes, we are probably having to wrap up soon, but I'll just tell you a very quick story. This is to give you the backstory about my friend who I was talking to about paid leave and paternity leave.
Yep.
And a flexible workplace. His name is Ed, the one
That
who just got
also
promoted.
cannot be underestimated.
Absolutely.
Flexibility is huge.
Yes, and I say, for him, I said to him, you want to help me create culture change? Don't make your workplace a culture where you have to raise your hand and take a piss. Don't make it a culture where you can't leave at 2 o'clock and have to sneak out.
Right.
Because in the Wall Street Journal, there was this beautiful column about the I forget her name. She's just ending her work-life balance column that started in the 80s. And she said that was one of the things she always had to do, sneak out over care. And we should never have to do that.
Right.
It should just be announced. It should be celebrated when you're going to your kids' sing, when you're taking them to the doctor, when you get called. And the other thing I said to him, I said, the first thing I want you to ask all of your male employees is for them to become number one on the call list for the school.
Oh my God! Hallelujah!
That's what I said.
That's
what I asked him to do.
So my kids just switched to school, and my husband filled out all the forms, and I said, I don't even give the school my number.
Yes,
the
I
school,
love
and
it.
it seems
I love it.
like I'm a bad mom, but I'm like,
no.
I can't. They call me for this shit, and I'm in Manhattan. He's a mile away from the school, and he knows whether or not my son is really sick or trying to get out of his chemistry exam. I don't know that stuff.
That's back to the context.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say my friend, she just had, and then I'll finish how I got to Ed and how taking agency in his own home got him to really think about these external policies and how beautiful fair play can be when you do that. But I will tell one quick story of my friend who is a breadwinner. She's the breadwinner of the family. And it was a weekend. She decided to take some of that self-care, not the commodified wellness. She went to go on a hike in Runyon Canyon. And that's a little bit far from where her in-laws were taking care of her baby. She was about 8 months at the time, her child. Well, the grandmother falls holding the baby, hurts her knee. It's like a whole disaster. The grandfather calls my friend in hiking and she's about 6-7 miles away. And my friend says, well, where's your son? Like, why haven't you called your son? And he said, well, he's golfing, which was about 10 blocks from where the father-in-law was. And he said, well, he's golfing and I'm not going to ruin his day. So back to women's time, right? Okay, so it's just like, and she's the breadwinner. So I'm like, you can't even make that argument that he like somehow makes more money. Whatever.
Right.
That's the patriarchy for you. But so she just was laughing and she said, well, go get your son off the golf course.
Good.
So I was happy. I'm happy she stood up and still continued her hike and everything worked out. It was okay. But back to Ed.
But she probably finished that hike with a lot of guilt and shame.
She did finish the hike with guilt and shame. 100%. I think that I'm glad you asked that question. She did. And I think that's why she told me that story.
Yeah.
Because she
carried it with her.
She was seething and resentful and she ended up crying on the hike. And there's a lot of emotions that came up from having to say no, for being assumed that she would be the one there, from her father-in-law guarding her husband's time.
For her worrying, for her mother-in-law.
Like, it was just the worth
things.
issues.
There's a lot in that
Yeah.
one little phrase. Like I think those are, we talk a lot about microaggressions, but those are the things that become really defining moments to people. And and to be fair to her father-in-law, like, it was a different time. And that's why we do the work that we do, because we're trying to make that time better for the generations behind us. But, you get those comments and they just really, on the wrong day, they can hurt.
Yeah. And the reason why I brought that up is also because of what you were saying about the schools. So when I see people playing fair play, or when Seth and I play fair play, it's actually harder to get my friend's father-in-law, like, as she's doing and trying to change her patterns in her house, it's actually almost harder to get her father-in-law and her mother-in-law involved.
The behaviors,
and the schools involved, right? Because we have institutional knowledge. We have patriarchy all around us. So that's why you sort of really have to start in your home and stay strong and firm. And I'm so strong and firm now that the school, Ben, I think it was Ben, that ended up falling on his face in a dodgeball game or something, and the school was so afraid to call me because they thought I'd be traveling. They were like, oh my God, we called Seth 5 times and he didn't pick up. I swear to God, we called him 5 times, but I just wanted to let you know that Ben's okay. I'm like, well, thank you for telling me that. And I really appreciate you telling me you tried Seth 5 times first, because that's what I've asked you to do.
Yeah.
And he's holding the teacher communication card.
But you have to, this week. You have to teach them how you want to be treated. Yeah,
absolutely. And then the more it becomes a cultural norm, hopefully the less we'll have to do that.
Right.
But we are on that forefront, that precipice where we have to do that.
Yep.
And so Ed. So I'll end with Ed.
Poor Ed.
So Ed is the kind of guy who said to me when I interviewed him first for Fair Play that he's the CEO outside the home and his wife's the CEO inside the home. Like, really throw up, like, gendered language that I just don't like. But he's a decent guy. So my friend Julie, she said to me that she was super overwhelmed. This was Christmas of 2018. And I'd interviewed her for Fair Play. So she understood this idea around Fair Play, which is this, what is your why, as we just talked about, and your ownership of something. And so she wanted to try it around the holidays because her mother had just entered the hospital for some sort of neurodegenerative, I don't know if that's how you say it, illness. And she's doing everything else, a lot of things for the holidays. She was booking some trip that they were taking to see relatives, trying to decorate the Christmas tree, still do her part-time consulting work, take her kids to school, make lunch, just over, everything that just snowballs around the holidays.
Yep.
And so she said that she was at her breaking point. So I asked her, I said, well, what's breaking you? Let's just start with that. And so she tells me it's her second son Brody's second grade Secret Santa project. Say that 5 times fast. It's a tongue twister. And because it has to be done from scratch, back to institutions that, really help us around the holidays. It has to be done from scratch.
With organic
organic flour or whatever, they have to grow 10 months in advance. So she wants to have Ed help her with that. And so she said, typically I would give him a list of everything he would need to help me with the Secret Santa project. But I know Fair Play is not that. And if I want to try it, like, I know I'm supposed to be giving him ownership. And I said, yes, I'm asking you to hand over the homework, school supplies, and projects card for one assignment. Just one card out of the 100 in the deck for one assignment with full ownership.
Yeah.
And then she had all these reasons why she couldn't, right? That Ed would be too busy, that he wouldn't do it, that she'd have to remind him, that it would be like a sock puppet and it would suck, just race to the bottom.
Right.
And so I said, but you just told me you wanted to try this, fair play.
Right.
So I need you to work with me here, Julie. So what I said to her is, let's back up. So where did we start this podcast? We talked about what is your why, that fair play is asking to have new conversations, right, around things like garbage. So I'm asking her to have a new conversation over things like homework and projects. So I said, why do you care about this Secret Santa project? So she pauses and she says, well, I care because it's the signature project of second grade where they have a whole unit around materialism.
Okay.
And that opening a handmade gift from a friend should feel just as special as a $100 Nerf gun. Oh. So I said, that's
a nice
very
sentiment.
impactful. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, you didn't tell me that. Okay.
I did not know Nerf guns cost $100.
I think I don't believe, we have an anti-gun policy in my house. So I don't know,
Same.
but I think they're relatively expensive.
Yeah.
Maybe they're $30, $40. I don't know. The super
I won't
ones,
hold it
I
to
don't know.
We don't fact check on this podcast.
No. Well, that was a quote, so that's a hearsay from my perspective. Well, it was her $100 quote. And then she says something even more impactful to me, which is that the little girl that Brody drew, she's in charge of transporting her kids to school. So she's there in the yard when she drops off Brody, who's in second grade. And she noticed that the little girl who he drew was new to the school that year. And what she notices about the little girl is that she just walks up and down the yard. Like, she's not playing she's waiting for the bell. And so she said, how nice it would be for Brody for us to understand that it would be really, go the extra mile for this little girl who's new to the school. Brody's popular. He's athletic. He's been there since he was in kindergarten. Make her something nice to welcome her to the school. Foster some empathy, because maybe Brody doesn't see that. Yeah. And so these were very powerful answers.
Like important
for
whys.
Damn, school, Secret Santa project.
Right. Like, it's not just something on the list.
No, it was but everything, when you really just sit down, even garbage, like we said, it can be powerful. Right. And so I said, what if, just do me a favor, just say that to Ed when emotion is low and cognition is high. So not when he rushes in, whenever you're maybe at a dinner with alcohol or, tomorrow morning before kids get up, whatever is a time when you just a set of quiet, just say those two things that, this is something you'd like him to own. There's a lot of other stuff that's on her plate for Christmas, and this is why. Mm-hmm. Not how, nothing, just how, why. So the beauty was I got to check in with them after the holidays. I'm so happy I did, because I was interviewing a lot and I almost forgot to check in. But I got Ed, and he tells me that he began Googling Secret Santa projects for little girls with his son Brody. So that's in the Fair Play system in organizational management, what we call the conception. Right. The full ownership. Takes conception, planning to execution. And then they decide on a popsicle stick jewelry box. So they write down colored popsicle sticks, glitter, glue. My favorite thing in the world was Ed gave me so many details. My CEO outside the home guy, he started getting really into the story and telling me that Brody even wanted a knob for the jewelry box because he didn't want the little girl to have to use two hands to open her jewelry box. He wanted her to be able to take out her jewelry and open the box at the same time.
I don't think we have to worry about Brody with empathy. I think he's got it.
He wanted a knob. And Ed's telling me this. So that is the planning. Yeah. He's doing the conception and planning. Yep. Not just getting a list to execute. And then he tells me that he discovered this really cool store called Michael's. And it's really
little known store.
Yeah, I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna check that place out.
Little mom and pop.
Yeah, mom and pop place where you can get everything. So it wasn't even that difficult because we just had to go to one place and pick up the stuff. But what was interesting was that Julie, who's not a hyperbolic person, said to me that her life changed in that moment or that day when we were talking to them in the interview after the holidays. And I said, well, what? You're not hyperbolic. Like, you don't say these fantastical statements. What changed for you? And she said to me that when she got home from doing one of her 10,000 holiday errands, she saw Brody and Ed on the floor. And they were building this project, this popsicle stick jewelry box for this little girl. and she noticed out of the corner of her eye that Ed had glitter on his hands. And so I said to her, why was that so meaningful for you to see that? And she said, it was the first time that I felt like he was truly in it with me. And because glitter gets everywhere and fucks up, like your house is on her and not him. Yeah. And so I started really thinking about that, about the beauty, right, of inviting men to step into their full power in the home so that we can step out into the world and into women's full power. And I believe it starts with glitter. I believe that when you take agency in your own home, then it reverberates. And I know that because Ed, my most amazing case study that I said he has to out himself at some point, because it's all positive now, all this amazing stuff I'm saying about him, is that he's getting more, he's gotten even more powerful in his job since I've known him. And that was how, by doing that glitter box, by working on the value of care, by sitting with his son Brody and realizing the meaning of what it felt like to own something in the home from start to finish and not just get a list from his wife where there was no context or no connection or no ownership.
Right.
That beauty, that core of fair play is now something that they're implementing in their home. And he doesn't hold a lot of cards still.
Right.
But when he does hold them, he holds them with
entirely.
ownership and with context and understands the importance of it. And not only that, but that's how we got to having that conversation when I called him to congratulate him on his promotion about the value of care. Yeah. And that's how we got to our three things around flexibility, pay equity, and paternity leave. And so how beautiful is that? Yeah.
That's amazing. Because that is, I love ending on a story with glitter because who doesn't?
Who doesn't? It's glitter.
But it's a beautiful thing because those are moments that are actually really fun and really meaningful as a parent and as a child. And to make it not a chore and make it something that's just a moment of like that's actually self-care, is to just be present with your kids and not let these moments pass and let Brody feel, was it Brody or Brady?
Yeah, Brody.
Let Brody feel the importance of welcoming this girl in a place where she might not feel welcome. It's just really, it's really a beautiful story that much came out of one thing. That then results in the change for this family and this life for somebody who's now leading a company and can change the family and lives of others. It's heroes work.
I do believe it. And I believe it starts with glitter.
Yeah.
Everybody play. Go into your homes. Have these new conversations because it is about ultimately how we connect is who we become.
Yeah,
that's what the research shows. And what are we doing? Why are we on this earth? We're on this earth where you're talking about breadwinning women. You're making financial wealth for your family. You're the leaders in your organizations often. Mm-hmm. You're creating better corporations. And ultimately this is to build better societies for our children and for the next generation. So we have to model this behavior that care matters. Mm-hmm. And then when we do, it reverberates in all different types of ways that we won't even know yet.
Yeah, we won't even know. Well, I'm so thrilled to have had you
here.
This
is so fun.
I cannot wait to hear what you're doing next and have you back into the newsstand. And thank you so much for making time to be with us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's been awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in for our conversation in Newsstand Studios at Rock Center. Lots more to come every Tuesday, so head on over to iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe so you don't miss anything. Please feel free to leave us a review to give us some direct feedback and also to help get the podcast in front of more eyes and ears. We really appreciate your support. Until next time.